Imagine overnighting a vial of, cutting-edge regenerative medicine, a therapy that could heal damaged tissues, reduce systemic inflammation, and theoretically even reverse cellular aging.
Right, the holy grail of biologics.
Exactly.
Right.
So it arrives at your clinic, the doctor draws it up into a syringe, injects it into a patient's joint, and absolutely nothing happens.
Oh, wow.
Yeah. And why? Because somewhere along the supply chain, the ambient temperature shifted by just, like, a few degrees. And it turned this miracle biologic into a microscopic soup of dead, totally useless proteins.
I mean, that is the terrifying reality of the therapeutic landscape we're looking at today. We are moving away from traditional synthetic drugs, the pills that just sit stable in your medicine cabinet for years, and we're stepping into this highly volatile world of biologics.
Which brings us to today. Welcome to a custom deep dive exploring the microscopic, high-stakes world of exosomes. They're nature's ultimate biological couriers, and they're completely revolutionizing regenerative medicine. But their power is entirely dependent on one massive vulnerability.
It really is.
So our mission today is to synthesize a huge stack of biotech patents, laboratory protocols, and clinical reviews. We want to determine exactly what cold chain storage and cryopreservation protocols actually preserve exosomal membrane stability, right up until clinical reconstitution.
We really have to establish the stakes immediately here.
Yeah.
You could have the most potent, beautifully engineered biologic in the world, but if the freezing and thawing process is mishandled in even a seemingly tiny way...
You're not delivering a cure.
Exactly. You aren't delivering a regenerative cure at all. You're just injecting really expensive water.
Man, that's brutal. So before we can explore how the biotech industry is desperately trying to preserve these vesicles, we need to understand why they break so easily in the first place. What's the baseline problem with their architecture?
Well, it really comes down to their physical scale and their structural fragility. Exosomes are, they are unbelievably tiny. We are talking 30 to maybe 150 nanometers in diameter.
Wow.
Yeah. To put that in perspective for you, a single human hair is about 80 to 100,000 nanometers wide.
So they are vanishingly small.
Incredibly small.
And their entire job in the human body is to travel around, physically dock with target cells, and inject their cargo, right? Like crucial instructions, microRNA, and growth factors that essentially tell other cells to repair themselves.
That's it. They are basically delivery vehicles. And the hull of that vehicle is a phospholipid bilayer.
A fat-based membrane.
Right. It's very similar to the membrane that surrounds our own human cells. But because they are made of this highly delicate lipid layer, they are exquisitely sensitive to temperature changes. When you lower the temperature to freeze them for long-term storage, the water content both inside and outside the exosome changes.
Okay, so let me try an analogy. If I freeze a water balloon, the water inside it expands as it turns to ice, and the jagged ice crystals will physically puncture the rubber. Is that basically what's happening to the exosome's lipid membrane when it hits the freezer?
That is a great starting visual, actually. But the physics at the nanoscale are, they're even more astonishing.
How so?
Well, it isn't just the ice crystals acting like microscopic daggers. At low water contents during freezing, those lipid membranes undergo a really severe physical phase transition.
A phase transition. What happens to the membrane structurally?
So it shifts from a flexible, resilient, liquid crystalline state, which is, how it naturally bends and moves through the body, into this rigid, leaky, gel-like state.
A gel.
Yeah, when the lipids gel, they pack together really tightly and stiffen up. They just completely lose all their elasticity.
Oh, I see. So the rubber of the balloon doesn't just get poked by the ice. The rubber itself turns brittle and just kind of cracks under its own tension.
Exactly that. And the physical shear stress of the surrounding liquid turning into solid ice just tears that brittle membrane wide open. This is exactly why repeated freeze-thaw cycles are so devastating.
Because it's cracking and freezing over and over.
Right. The data actually shows every single freeze-thaw cycle drops the bioactivity of the exosomes by about 15 to 20%.
Wow. So overall, a clinic could lose up to 50% of their efficacy just by cycling the temperature a few times during transport or, just moving vials between freezers. That is massive.
It highlights a really stark reality. The supply chain and the clinical handling are just as important as the manufacturing process itself. The second that lipid sphere ruptures, the therapy is completely gone.
There was this real-world anecdote in our sources from Dr. Edward Park that really drove the clinical consequences of this home for me. He described this scenario where a medical clinic's freezer just loses power for 12 hours.
Oh, a power outage is an absolute nightmare scenario for these therapies.
Right, and he said the exosomes essentially just melt and lies. The membrane breaks, and that precious cargo, the microRNA, just floats away freely into the fluid.
Yeah, there's no delivery mechanism left.
Dr. Park actually noted he once received a clinical shipment in Hawaii that had been sitting at room temperature for just 3 hours on the loading dock. He used a huge number of those vials on a patient and felt absolutely nothing. No clinical effect whatsoever.
See, that exact supply chain vulnerability leads directly to this massive divide in the biotech industry. Because temperature fluctuations are so destructive, the industry is split into two rival camps on how to best lock these exosomes in stasis.
Okay, let's hear them.
We have the cryogenic deep freeze camp, and then we have the lyophilization or freeze drying camp.
Let's start with the deep freeze camp. They are relying on liquid frozen storage at ultra-low temperatures, right? Anywhere from minus 80 degrees Celsius down to minus 196 degrees Celsius.
Right, which is literal liquid nitrogen territory.
Yeah, that's intense. So what's the benefit there?
The goal there is total metabolic arrest. At those extreme temperatures, biological degradation processes completely halt. The research indicates this method perfectly preserves the critical surface markers on the outside of the exosome.
And those are the proteins known as CD9, CD63, and CD81.
Exactly.
And just to clarify for everyone listening, those markers act as the actual physical keys that the exosome uses to recognize and dock with the target cells in your body.
Yes, and without those markers intact, the exosome is essentially blind. It will just bounce right off the cells. This intense cold keeps them highly active, though, allowing them to retain 95 to 98% of their bioactivity for up to 12 months.
That's incredible. But the catch is the logistics, right?
Yeah.
You need a crazy intense cold chain network. You're shipping overnight on heavy, dry ice. And clinics have to store them in these specialized, incredibly expensive ultra-low freezers.
That's the major drawback, because if they sit at warmer temperatures, even a standard minus 20-degree medical freezer or, a regular 4-degree refrigerator degradation accelerates immediately.
Just from normal fridge.
Oh, yeah. Another crucial marker, TSG101, degrades rapidly unless kept at those ultra-low temperatures. Standard refrigeration just exposes the exosomes to protein denaturation and rapid clumping.
Okay, so on the other side of the ring, offering a solution to that absolute logistical nightmare, we have the lyophilization camp, freeze drying. So they freeze the exosomes, but then they use sublimation under a vacuum to pull out like 95% of the water, right, leaving behind a dry powder.
Exactly. And the pros are pretty obvious for a busy clinic. You can ship a dry powder at room temperature, completely bypassing the nightmare of dry ice and failing freezers.
Right, no power outage fears.
Exactly. And once you get it, you can just store it in a standard 4-degree fridge for up to 36 months.
Wow, 3 years. But the cons are highly debated in the sources. They point out that the intense dehydration process causes massive osmotic shifts. Like, pulling that much water out actually alters the electrical charge of the exosome surface.
Yeah, it shifts what's called the zeta potential by plus or minus 5 millivolts.
Okay, zeta potential. That is essentially the electrical force field around the exosome, right? Like a static charge keeping them all repelled from one another so they don't clump up.
That is exactly it. So when the zeta potential shifts significantly, that repulsive force weakens, and the exosomes just begin to attract each other, sticking together in these large aggregates. Plus, just that drying process alone can cause a 10 to 15% loss of the microRNA payload.
Okay, so if you're listening to this and you're looking at a supplier's brochure boasting about their freeze-dried exosomes, you might notice they almost always show a certificate of analysis.
Oh, the COA. Yes.
Yeah, and that certificate usually proves their powder still has a really high protein content. It's used as this marketing tactic to say, look, lyophilization works perfectly. All the product is still right here. That kind of proves it works, doesn't it?
No, and this is perhaps the most critical distinction you need to make when evaluating these therapies. We have to rigorously separate protein presence from protein bioavailability.
Because just because the protein is sitting in the vial doesn't mean it can actually do anything in the human body.
Exactly. Retaining the biological components inside a glass vial is not the same as retaining biological activity.
Right.
The protein might technically be present in that freeze-dried powder, but if the freeze-drying process destroyed the lipid membrane, if our water balloon popped, so to speak, that protein can no longer enter the target cell. It's just loose protein floating in the fluid.
So how does a clinic actually prove they are still injecting intact, functional spheres.
The only real way to prove clinical viability is through a process called NTA, or nanoparticle tracking analysis, and that has to be performed post-reconstitution.
After you add the water back in.
Right. You rehydrate the powder and use NTA to visually and physically verify that the particles are still intact, roughly 110 nanometer spheres. A certificate showing total protein mass tells you absolutely nothing about the membrane integrity.
So, since both freezing and freeze-drying carry these huge risks of popping these nanoballoons, scientists can't just put them in a vial of salt water and hope for the best. They actually deploy chemical bodyguards, right? Lyoprotectants and cryoprotectants that are added directly to the storage vials.
Yeah, to protect the exosomes from the physical and thermal stresses. And the absolute standout in research is a sugar called trehalose.
Trehalose. So, since it's a sugar, I'm picturing it acting almost like a microscopic syrup, like physically coating the outside of the exosome so the ice crystals can't touch it. Am I close there?
It's actually even more elegant than that on a molecular level. Trehalose physically hydrogen bonds with the polar lipid heads of the exosome membrane.
Polar lipid heads being the water-loving outside layer of the fat membrane.
Yes. It acts as a sort of molecular substitute for water during the dehydration or the freezing. By binding directly to those lipids, the sugar maintains the structural spacing between the molecules so the membrane doesn't collapse or enter that rigid, brittle gel state we discussed earlier.
That is brilliant. And they also pair it with polymers, right? The patents heavily reference a polymer called PVP40, which works by increasing the glass transition temperature, or Tukey-Tale, of the solution to over 70 degrees Celsius.
Right.
And by raising the TRAGE, it ensures the surrounding fluid turns into this stable, smooth, glass-like state, rather than forming those damaging, jagged ice crystals.
Exactly. A key study found that a very specific combination, 100 millimolar trehalose plus 5% PVP40, was highly optimal for preserving exosomes during lyophilization.
Wow.
But the bioengineering goes way beyond just sugars and basic polymers.
Yeah, we read about chelating agents like EDTA or EGTA working synergistically with saccharides. And some of the novel patents go completely sci-fi, using pectin or sodium alginate to form these protective colloidal solutions.
Yes.
Some are even enclosing the exosomes in gel-made hydrogels or attaching them to gold nanoparticles to create a literal nanoshield.
Let's actually focus on those hydrogels for a moment.
Okay, so instead of packing a fragile laptop in a box of loose styrofoam peanuts, which is basically our standard salt water, these hydrogels are like that custom-molded foam that locks everything perfectly in place.
That is a perfect translation of the mechanism. A hydrogel traps the surrounding water molecules in this three-dimensional microscopic web. Because the water molecules are trapped in this web, they physically cannot organize themselves into sharp, jagged ice crystals. The exosome is just suspended safely in a soft matrix.
That's amazing. But amidst all these complex additives, there is a hidden danger in the baseline formulation that often gets overlooked. And it has to do with the simplest part of the mixture, the buffer solution itself.
Right, specifically PBS, or phosphate buffered saline, which is used in almost every lab in the entire world.
Yeah.
PBS is completely standard, but using it during freezing has a really severe hidden risk. The phosphate formulations can undergo a massive drop in pH up to 3.5 units when they are frozen.
Wait, really? Why does the pH drop just because the liquid gets cold?
It happens because a specific component, sodium phosphate, physically precipitates out of the liquid as it freezes.
Oh, I see.
Yeah, its solubility changes with the temperature, so it separates out as a solid crystal. And the remaining liquid is suddenly stripped of its buffering capacity, which completely throws off the acid-base balance and causes this extreme acidic drift.
So you're plunging delicate nanoscale lipid vesicles into a highly acidic environment mid-freeze. That alters their protein conformation and can lace them completely before they even finish freezing.
Exactly.
But, all of this bioengineering raises a major patient safety pushback. Like, doesn't loading the vial up with all these polymers, sugars, chelating agents, and hydrogels risk altering how the human body actually absorbs the therapy?
You've hit on a major, major debate in precision medicine right now. While these stabilizers are incredible for ensuring exosome survival in the glass vial, clinical purists argue fiercely against them.
Because they're unnatural.
Right. Introducing non-native additives, even seemingly benign sugars, might alter the bioavailability. Yeah. The target cells in the patient's body might not recognize a sugar-coated exosome the same way.
Or worse, these additives might trigger adverse immune reactions in highly sensitive patient populations.
Yes.
So these clinical purists prefer a pure product, even if it's way harder to store.
This is exactly why top-tier labs strictly utilize additive-free -80 degrees Celsius storage. They prioritize a cleaner, more biologically representative product, relying entirely on ultra-fast, ultra-cold freezing to maintain the integrity without any of that chemical scaffolding.
Right.
It requires perfect cold chain logistics, but it avoids the additive debate entirely.
Okay, so if you manage to navigate this absolute minefield of freezing, chemical buffering, and supply chain logistics, you still have to actually get it into a patient. Does the danger end once the vial finally reaches the doctor's office?
Not at all. That final step, clinical reconstitution, is where human error can literally destroy months of careful, expensive laboratory preparation in a matter of seconds.
Jeez. Okay, looking at the liquid frozen exosomes first. The absolute rule is a gentle single thaw protocol. You thaw them in room temperature water or a 37 degrees Celsius water bath for just 2 to 5 minutes.
Then the absolute cardinal rules: never refreeze them. Once they are thawed, they are awake and they are vulnerable. And never, ever put them in a warm IV bag or use a heat pack to speed things up.
Okay, and if a clinic is using the lyophilized freeze-dried powder, they must add a precise amount of deionized water or buffer so, for example, exactly 100 microliters of fluid to a 100 microgram standard, and then they have to let it incubate undisturbed for 5 to 10 minutes.
Right. You must allow the powder to dissolve completely on its own before you interfere with it.
And the physical mixing technique is where things get really fascinating. The protocols dictate pipetting the solution up and down 10 to 15 times gently, avoiding bubbles at all costs. But why are bubbles so catastrophic at this scale? Like, to us, it's just harmless air.
Right, to us. But at the nanoscale, a bubble isn't just harmless air. The surface tension of a bubble is a powerful, sheer physical force.
Really?
Yeah, it acts like a vacuum, dragging the vesicles along its surface and forcing them to crash into each other and clump together.
Wow. So if a clinician needs to ensure the solution is homogeneous, a brief vortex for a maximum of 60 seconds or a quick centrifuge spin is acceptable, but it requires extreme gentleness.
Yes. And let's consider a real-world clinic scenario here. A busy clinician has patients waiting in 3 different rooms, and they are in a rush. If they shake the vial vigorously just to mix it faster, they are introducing a massive amount of kinetic energy and thousands of these microbubbles.
So the physics of that failure means they are physically forcing these nanoscale vesicles into a biological traffic jam.
Basically, they clump into useless aggregates. They are no longer single couriers capable of docking with the cell. The target cells simply can't use them.
And what if that same busy clinician gets distracted and lets the thawed vial just sit on the counter all afternoon? There's a ticking clock, right?
A very strict one. Once reconstituted or thawed, they must be administered within 2 to 4 hours.
That's not a lot of time.
No, it's not. Leaving them at room temperature past that 4-hour mark invites rapid structural degradation. The lipids start to spontaneously break down, the proteins denature, and because these are rich biological fluids, you invite rapid bacterial growth.
Gross.
Yeah, if you stumble at the finish line, the entire therapy is ruined.
So preserving exosomes isn't just about throwing a vial in a freezer and forgetting about it. It is an intricate, delicate dance of lipid physics, glass transition chemistry, and incredibly precise clinical handling. All of this is required just to ensure these biological couriers can actually deliver their regenerative payload to the patient.
It really emphasizes that in the world of advanced biologics, the process is the product.
I like that.
You simply cannot separate the therapeutic value from the storage and handling protocols.
Which leaves me with a thought I really haven't been able to shake. We've just spent all this time detailing how incredibly fragile exosomes are. They are hypersensitive to ambient temperature. They break under shear stress. They lease if the pH shifts even a little bit in a highly controlled, sterile laboratory setting.
Right. They require absolute perfection.
So how does the human body's own internal turbulence affect them?
Oh, that's interesting.
Think about it. The shifting temperatures when we have a fever, the wildly varying acidity levels in different tissues or inside a highly inflamed joint, the massive shear stress of blood pumping violently through our arteries and veins. How does all of that internal chaos affect the millions of exosomes we're naturally transmitting inside ourselves right this second?
That is a phenomenal concept. I mean, if an exosome degrades so easily in a pristine glass vial, what happens to an exosome traveling through a highly inflamed acidic environment in the body?
Right. Could our own internal storage conditions actually be altering our cellular communication on a daily basis?
It definitely suggests our cellular messaging system is far more dynamic and perhaps more vulnerable to our overall physiological state than we currently realize.
Definitely something to mull over the next time you feel your temperature rising or your joints aching. Well, that wraps up this deep dive. You're now armed with the ultimate biotech cheat sheet for evaluating extracellular vesicle therapies and understanding exactly what it takes to keep them alive from the freezer to the clinic. Thanks for joining the exploration with us, and we'll catch you on the next one.